Look down on Egypt after dark and the country almost disappears. What's left is a single thread of light, running south to north, flaring into the shape of a lotus flower before it meets the sea. That thread is the Nile, and on it, and almost only on it, lives nearly the entire population of one of the biggest countries in the region. More than 109 million Egyptians live here, and by NASA's own accounting from orbit, more than 95% of them are packed onto less than 5% of the country's land. The rest of Egypt, the vast, majority of the map you learned in school, is close to empty. This isn't really a country with a population problem. It's a country with a real estate problem, and the real estate that actually works has never been more than a narrow green ribbon a few kilometers wide, plus the fan-shaped delta where that ribbon spreads out and meets the Mediterranean. Everyone else, the farmer, the office worker in Cairo, the fisherman on the Delta coast, the family in a high-rise apartment block, lives inside that same thread, whether they think about it or not. Zoom out far enough, and every one of Egypt's 100 million plus people lives inside a shape you could trace with one finger. So the real question this film is asking isn't why does Egypt have so many people? It's stranger than that. Why does an entire nation fit itself onto a single filament of green? And why has almost nothing, in 5,000 years, ever managed to change that? To understand why everyone crowds onto that thread, you have to understand what surrounds it, and why the surrounding land refuses to support life. Egypt sits inside a belt of the atmosphere that circles the planet at these latitudes, a standing zone of high pressure where air that rose at the equator dumped its moisture as tropical rain far to the south, and traveled north at high altitude, finally sinks back down. As that air falls, it compresses and warms, and warm air holds onto moisture instead of releasing it as rain. The result is a dome of dry, stable, cloud-resistant air parked over the same ground, year after year, for as long as anyone has measured it. This is the same mechanism that builds the Kalahari, the deserts of Arabia, and the deserts of the American Southwest. In Egypt, it produces one of the driest landscapes anywhere. Across the northern Sahara, average rainfall comes to only around 3 inches a year, and even that arrives unevenly, in isolated storms that can be decades apart in the deep interior. There are no young, rain-catching mountains here to help, the way the Andes wring moisture out of Pacific air or the Himalaya bend the monsoon. Egypt's desert plateaus are old and largely flat, offering nothing to lift air and force out rain. The sky above most of the country simply does not deliver enough water, in any given year, to grow a crop or fill a well, which means every drop of water this civilization has ever depended on had to arrive from somewhere else entirely, carried in, not fallen from Egyptian skies. That is exactly what the next part of the story is about. The water that makes Egypt possible barely ever falls on Egypt at all. Most of it falls more than 1,000 kilometers to the south, on a completely different country's mountains. The Nile is really 3 rivers pretending to be one. The White Nile begins around the East African Lake Plateau, near Lake Victoria, and flows north at a slow, steady pace year-round. The Blue Nile and the Atbara begin far to the east, in the highlands of Ethiopia, where a summer monsoon dumps enormous seasonal rain roughly from July through October. That distant monsoon is the real engine of the whole system. Where the rivers meet at Khartoum, the Blue Nile alone has historically supplied around 70% of the floodwater moving north, with the Atbara adding roughly another fifth. Altogether, something like 85% of the water that reaches Egypt began as rain that fell on the Ethiopian plateau. For thousands of years, that distant monsoon showed up in Egypt as a predictable, almost clockwork flood. The river rose through summer, crested in autumn, spread across the valley floor, and left behind a fresh layer of dark silt as it withdrew. Ancient Egyptian agriculture was built entirely around that calendar, planting after the water pulled back, harvesting before the next flood arrived. The silt itself, not rainfall, was the fertilizer, renewing the valley's farmland every single year, for free, indefinitely. Said plainly, it's a strange arrangement. One of the ancient world's great civilizations grew almost entirely on borrowed water and borrowed soil, both manufactured by weather on someone else's mountains, delivered downstream through a single channel with no other source of supply. Beat the desert once, and it never really goes away. You just have to keep beating it, every single year, forever. Take that thin band of silt and water and pack more than 100 million people onto it, and you get some of the highest population densities anywhere on the planet. Move even a short distance away from the river and the numbers collapse toward nothing. The deserts on either side hold only a sliver of the population spread across the great majority of the country's land. Move back onto the green, and in a number of the governorates that hug the Nile, density climbs past 2,000 people per square kilometer. It's a pattern viewers of this channel have seen before, just with a different villain. In Japan, mountains left only about a third of the country's ground habitable, and 123 million people crowded onto that third. In Egypt, the desert is far less forgiving. The workable ground isn't a third of the country, it's a sliver in the single digits, and the crowding, if anything, is even more extreme. Cairo, the governorate, holds some 10.4 million people. Next door, Giza holds another 9.7 million. Stitch the whole connected sprawl together and Greater Cairo holds around 25 million people, more than a fifth of the country, living in one contiguous urban mass you could walk across in a long day. North of the capital, the Nile splits and fans out into the delta, and the crowding doesn't ease, it just changes shape. Instead of one river's narrow banks, there are now dozens of branching waterways, each with its own dense ribbon of towns, fields, and canal-side villages, feeding some of the most intensively farmed ground on Earth. Wherever the water goes, in Egypt, the people go with it at extraordinary density. Wherever the water doesn't go, for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, almost nobody lives at all. For thousands of years, the flood was the deal, a wild, occasionally destructive river, in exchange for free annual fertilizer. In the 20th century, Egypt tore up that deal and wrote a new one. Between 1960 and 1970, Egypt built the Aswan High Dam across the Nile near its southern border, an embankment more than 3.5 kilometers long and over 100 meters tall. Behind it, the river backed up into Lake Nasser, a reservoir stretching roughly 500 kilometers south into Sudan, with a storage capacity of more than 40 cubic miles of water. 12 turbines inside the dam eventually produced over 2 gigawatts of electricity, bringing power to Egyptian villages that had never had it before. The dam ended the annual flood completely. In 1970, for the first time in recorded memory, the Nile simply didn't rise. That was the entire point. No more unpredictable flood years wiping out a harvest, no more drought years starving the population, and a reservoir large enough to smooth the river's wild swings into something a government could actually plan around. It came at a cost beyond the roughly $1 billion spent building it. Filling the reservoir meant relocating around 90,000 people, Egyptian farmers and Nubian communities whose homes now sit under Lake Nasser, and physically moving the ancient temple complex at Abu Simbel, block by numbered block, to keep it above the new waterline. And the silt, the free fertilizer that had rebuilt the valley every year for millennia, now mostly settles out inside the reservoir instead of reaching the fields downstream. Egypt solved the flood. It has spent every year since managing what solving it cost. Cut off the silt at the source, and the delta downstream starts losing a fight it had been winning for thousands of years. Without fresh sediment arriving every year, the outer edge of the delta isn't being rebuilt as fast as the Mediterranean wears it down, while the land itself slowly subsides. Coastal researchers who study the delta describe an accelerating squeeze, the sea creeping higher, the land settling lower, and stretches of coastline near the old river mouths retreating over time, serious enough that Egyptian authorities have built, and keep extending, seawalls and coastal defenses along Alexandria and other delta towns just to hold the line. At the same time, the delta is losing farmland from the opposite direction, not to the sea, but to its own success. The same crowding that built some of the highest rural densities on the planet is now paving over some of the richest soil in the country. Satellite images tracked by NASA show urban and suburban development steadily eating into delta farmland decade after decade, in a country where only a sliver of all land can grow food to begin with. The fan that fed a nation is shrinking from both ends at once. Egypt's response has been to try something almost no country attempts: build a second capital from scratch, out in the empty desert itself, roughly 45 kilometers east of Cairo. The government has already moved ministries there, and the president was sworn in for a new term inside its walls in 2024. On paper, it's designed to eventually hold millions of people. In practice, years after ground was broken, it holds only tens of thousands, a small fraction of Cairo's overflow, still waiting to see whether people will actually follow the government out of the valley. Every piece of this fits together into one continuous machine, a belt of sinking, drying air parks over almost all of Egypt and makes the desert permanent. A monsoon 1,000 kilometers away, on someone else's mountains, sends a river north anyway, and for millennia that river's flood-built and refertilized a strip of farmland along its banks. More than 109 million people now live almost entirely inside that strip, on less than 5% of the country's land, because the other 95% still can't reliably grow food or hold water. A dam changed the terms in the 20th century, trading the flood for electricity and predictability, and quietly moved the sediment problem downstream, where a sinking delta and a half-built desert capital are two different governments' attempts to answer the same question. What do you do when the only land that has ever worked is running out of room? None of this is really about Egypt refusing to spread out. It's about physics and rainfall leaving almost no other option. The desert was never going to be optional, and the threat of green was never going to be big enough. So for 5,000 years, on and off, through flood and famine and a poured concrete dam that finally tamed the river, the country has just kept packing itself, more densely every generation, onto the one line on the map where the water actually is. The Nile didn't just carve Egypt's landscape. It's the only reason there's a country here to look down on at all.